I don't know who's this guy you just described. It's a nice name though. Anyways,
You're even adversarial around the introduction you get. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I've known. I mean, I seem to remember it done around, around the Bitcoin space as soon as I started to get interested. So you might have been around. You must have been around longer than I have. And
I've always thought of you as a noob.
Yeah, exactly. I still am. I'm a noob at heart. And well, I mean, Idan has always been in the forefront of everything. Like you've built businesses around this stuff for like a long time ago, and I think he's in the forefront now too with the Sovryn stuff, which is kind of going against the flow of what some people in Bitcoin community seem to believe, but I think this is where things are going. You can probably tell us more about Sovryn. I'm not going to do this for you, but I think it's cool. And I don't know what we're going to talk about. I don't know. It's some tweet said it's going to be a debate. I'm not going to debate anything. I'm done with debates. I have a very steep fee for a debate, so this one isn't going to be a debate. This is just going to be a discussion.
Well, that sounds good to me. I had a few thoughts about stuff that I wanted to ask you about. So, maybe for some of the people listening, it's worthwhile giving a little bit of context here. The way I've known you is you've been a developer, and I got to know you initially as a developer in this space. And I think you've always been very thoughtful and very interested, not just building around Bitcoin, but also building and understanding the actual core, right? The hardcore of the clients and the nodes and how the actual system works. And you've also been deeply engaged in defending Bitcoin. And I think a lot of people find, if we believe in Bitcoin, there's two kind of approaches, right? Some people like to say Bitcoin's inevitable. I just need to HODL. I don't need to do anything else. And then there's people who say, nothing's inevitable. In fact, we would be very, very lucky if we finally got sound money to become, the standard that the world uses, and that really it's up to us. And I think for me, you've always been more of the second kind, right? Very, very interested in making sure that we don't just leave it up to chance.
But yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. But I think one way that's expressed itself and is you for a long time were extremely vocal about being anti sort of altcoin shitcoinery, and in particular around Ethereum. And most recently, you've changed tack and started spending a lot of your time and taking a lot of flack and heat from the Bitcoin community, right? Your community, around the fact that you're started criticizing Bitcoin toxicity. So that's something I wanted to ask you about. Like, what is the thinking behind that? And has it changed your view on sort of the central value of Bitcoin? Or, but maybe let's start with how your thinking has changed around what it is that you're opposing.
Yeah, well, I never saw things like Ethereum as a threat. But I also thought, that's not a secret. If you look at things I've said in the last few years, I thought, that no one will find any interest in Ethereum. And that very clearly is not what happened. Like you can see that there's a lot of mainstream interest in Ethereum these days. And I just think that, just being like, I had reasons to have my beliefs. In the past, I believe I understand Ethereum pretty well, And I think I knew pretty well what was going on Ethereum, and I just my understanding of it was that those things are not going to be interesting for a mainstream audience. Now I'm looking at it now, and that was simply wrong. You make a prediction ends up being wrong, and you have to change your mind when there's new information. So if you assume that what everyone is doing on something like Ethereum is not going to interest people, and that's why you think it's not interesting, and then you realize it does interest a ton of people, then that's new information, and it will be silly not to change your mind when you're presented with new information. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to talk about when it comes to toxicity on Bitcoin. A lot of people tell me, "Oh, you think we need to be nice to everyone? You think that you think that people who are offended are not going to be on Bitcoin or whatever?" And I'm like, no, I don't think you need to be nice. I'm not a particularly nice person myself, and I'm not saying you have to be nice to people if you don't want to. Although some people might find that it's nice to be nice, but you don't have to. You can do whatever you want. The thing is, when you convince yourself that everyone else is wrong just because they look at things, they're interested in other things, then there's absolutely no chance that you will realize when new information is presented and when you might have to change your opinion on things. Because if what you're saying is, well, Ethereum is bad because it's not Bitcoin, and I'm never going to look at what people are interested in with Ethereum, and I'm never going to look at what excites so many people in the mainstream about it, just because it's called Ethereum and that's a scam, then you're never going to learn anything about anything. And Yago, you must remember that when probably around the time that both of us got interested in Bitcoin, the main narrative around altcoins was that Bitcoin is going to win because Bitcoin will adopt whatever altcoins do that is good. It'll take maybe longer and it will have to be slower, but eventually Bitcoin will adopt all the good things that altcoins are doing. So there's nothing to worry about. And that seems increasingly impossible because a lot of Bitcoiners just refuse to look at what's going on elsewhere. So are we ever going to adopt this if it's bad to look?
Yeah, so I that for me this has been like, if there's a crusade I'm on, right? If there's a hill I'm willing to die on, it's this, right? That we need to, up until around 2015, one of the strongest Bitcoin memes was exactly what you said. Anything that could be advantageous to Bitcoin will simply be adopted by Bitcoin, right? And that meme has totally disappeared from our lexicon. We don't discuss it anymore. And I think a lot of it has to do with the scars of the block size wars, right? The block size war was a trauma for the Bitcoin community. It created a sense of suspicion and hostility. There was censorship within our own forums. And there was the sense that if we were not crusaders for the highest degree of possible purity, then we might lose Bitcoin forever. And I'm not saying that was wrong, right? I think the way that we went about it as a community in terms of the censorship on the different forums was extremely counterproductive. But I think that those wounds introduced we had this antibody reaction, right? We had this immune reaction, and it became an autoimmune disease. It became an allergic disease where we started eating ourselves, attacking ourselves. And now this idea of a purity test being applied to whether or not you're a Bitcoiner or not. This idea that it's impossible to talk about anything that has a token, impossible to talk about anything that wasn't developed by Bitcoiners. By Bitcoin Core, and that we shouldn't introduce any changes to Bitcoin ever, which, by the way, would be ideal. But the question is, how do we get there? Has, I think, made Bitcoin dumber, and it has given up a central value of Bitcoin, which is exactly what I was mentioning earlier, which is this adversarial thinking. I think Bitcoin has to be built on adversarial thinking, and that means that you need to understand everything out there. You need to be curious about the world, and you need to particularly be curious about those things which you think might be your enemy. And so, you asked me about Sovryn. The whole goal of Sovryn is to build out the ability to introduce Ethereum smart contracts, to introduce DeFi, to introduce all of these things seamlessly and natively in Bitcoin. And it's a big technological challenge, and we're not quite there yet, but we've made huge strides. And then the other thing that I've been doing is going around and saying, we should abandon this idea of toxicity. Maybe we should abandon this idea of being Bitcoin maximalist, because I think, even Bitcoin maximalist, it was a slur that was invented by Vitalik. And we sort of, prove, to beat our chests, we said we would take this as a badge of honor. But we need to be creating our own mimetic world, right? There's something very, very sinister, insidious internally when, it's something that we've seen many times, that groups will go and adopt a slur that was used against them. But usually it's much more powerful for you to create your own culture, your own mimetics, your own aspirational thinking. And so what I've started using is the term Bitcoin mutants, right? Like, how do we, and the reason I chose Bitcoin mutants is because I think there is DNA, there is interesting technology. Like, for example, zero-knowledge proofs, and particularly ZK rollups, is phenomenal progress on the cryptographic side. We should absolutely snap that up, right? And so we need to be looking for those pieces of, interesting mutations that are out there, and just suck all of that stuff in. We should mutate into a super form of Bitcoin, be the super predator that Bitcoin was always said to be. And so I think maybe for me, what's interesting is what do you think has been built out there, right? And this is the most heretical thing that I can ask, right? What has been built out there that you think is valuable?
I think things like ZK rollups, while interesting, I would be on the side of caution and say that there's really no need to go there right now. We can let ZK rollups play out wherever they play out on other chains, and then maybe, I don't know, 5 years from now, just throwing numbers, maybe we can start looking at how we can maybe integrate that into Bitcoin somehow. Because I think there's no rush on one hand, and on the other hand, I do support the kind of ethos of being very slow and careful with upgrades to the actual base Bitcoin protocol. So I think, they're fascinating technically, and they might allow new things. Honestly, we don't know yet, because even if the technology is really exciting, we don't know how it's going to be applied to the real world and what kind of value people will find in it. Maybe people are going to prefer like more kind of centralized, semi-custodial sidechains, and maybe they will not care about the magical ZK properties. We don't know yet. So I wouldn't go and change things immediately now, or in the coming couple of years, just because those are really cool things. I would wait for sure, but I would also say, we should look at it, we should learn from it, we should start thinking about how maybe we might want to change Bitcoin in the future, and we should definitely be allowed to talk about it without giving each other shit for talking about it. As to what's I think things that I like doing with my Bitcoin, I like to use it productively sometimes. Like if there's demand in the market for me lending some sats, and if I can find a way to get some good rates on it and stack more, then like, why not? I'm fine with that. And there's not necessarily any need to change, to change Bitcoin for that right now or ever, because we can already do that. We can do that, with things like Sovryn, and we can do that elsewhere too. We talked about this before. My opinion is, use whatever tools exist. I don't really care. Like if you have Bitcoin and you want to use them productively, then you can go and use WBTC on Ethereum or other chains, or you can use Liquid if you can find something useful to do there. You can use Sovryn. You can use a bunch of options. Do whatever, wherever you find a good opportunity and whatever fits your risk profile, go for it. I don't see, I don't care at all what kind of political allegiance it has. And that's what I kind of find funny. Like I feel like it's just a way to keep people stupid and poor, to say, well, yeah, you can definitely use lending products, but only if they use the following set of technologies approved by the Bitcoin Code, which I find insane. Like, why? if you know what you want to do and you know which asset you want to use, which is Bitcoin, then just do that. Who cares like how it's implemented? Like when you choose a ride sharing app or even a banking app, do you ask them what kind of database they use? Like, who cares? I really couldn't care less.
Well,
and you would care in the security sense, so that will help define your risk. But as long as you're fine with the risk, which is what investors do, right? They take risks. So as long as you understand the risk and you're fine with it, then I don't see any other problem.
Well, let me challenge you on that. So we're having this conversation on Twitter, which is a very, very good platform. But at the same time, I think I don't remember if you were censored, but a lot of the people that you and I know have been censored on Twitter. And we've given up a lot of privacy to use this platform. And all of the people who are listening to us right now and who are going to join the conversation in a while, are giving up their privacy to do this. It's not the ideal sort of web service that we would like to have. And it's very much a walled garden. And Twitter is probably one of the best of the walled gardens. Now, with Bitcoin was specifically designed with the view that people should be self-sovereign, that you not your keys, not your coins. There's no intermediaries. There's no middleman that can get in between or that is necessary for your transaction. Now, that doesn't mean that everything has to be done that way, but there's certainly a incredible value there. There's a cultural sort of value. I think it's what attracted us to Bitcoin in the first place, was building more of a world in that image. And so when you say, I don't really care, I don't know if I believe you. If you really didn't care, why would you be interested in Bitcoin in the first place? Right? Why would you be interested in Bitcoin if you're just going to hand it over to some kind of custodian or intermediary? So basically what I'm saying is, I don't know if I believe really. And I want your view. Like, shouldn't we care? Shouldn't we care what shape the economy of tomorrow takes?
Yeah, I'm probably more of the practical approach. Like when I look at Twitter, and I tell this people often when they ask me about, growing an audience for whatever it is that they're trying to do. What I would usually tell people is that Twitter is a tool where you can get discovered on, and you can think of it as like the top of the funnel, where people will find you for the first time and create some sort of connection with you. And Twitter is great for that. And obviously other platforms like TikTok and whatever, even better for that maybe these days. But they're very controlled. They're very closed. So what you want to do is you want to get exposure on these tools that are good for exposure, and then take those people somewhere else, maybe to a newsletter or a Telegram channel or whatever it is. And that way, my point is, that way you combine the best of both worlds. You use the tools that exist. You don't ignore the fact that they can give you something that the other tools cannot. You don't ideologically decide to not take part in or not use a tool for ideological reasons, and in that way you don't hurt yourself just for ideological reasons. So you take what you can from the tool and then you move it to the tool that you prefer. And I think that's the best way. That's the most reasonable and practical way. And similarly, if I look at the market and I see that some chain right now is going to have better opportunities financially, I will happily take advantage of those opportunities and then take the money, put it in Bitcoin, probably on the Bitcoin main chain too, and store it for long term. So I'm gonna do what I want to do with it, but I'm not going to, for ideological reasons, not take advantage of obvious opportunities that exist. And I think that's what everyone should be doing, and I think that's how something like Bitcoin can hope to win, by saying, okay, people want to throw, like, you have funds and you have VCs that want to throw money away on other chains. Great, I'll go take that and I'll vote. And after I go take that, I'll vote with my money and put it in the thing that I care about, which is Bitcoin. And that's how you help the cause too. So it's not an immoral thing to do. It's actually a way for you to help the cause that you believe in. It's just more practical. I think that if you exclude yourself from participating in obvious opportunities just because you believe it somehow contradicts your beliefs, then you just end up hurting both yourself and your ideologies.
I mean, I suppose that's one way of viewing it, right? And I think that there is definitely a place for sort of realpolitik. But the way you describe it, it sounds that you are completely agnostic as to whether or not you're, earning, like, if today there was, the perfect Bitcoin native smart contract platform, right? And you were able to transact on it and earn yield on it and do all of these things, would you still be looking to use a VC-backed chain, that was running on 21 nodes, just because you would get slightly higher yield there? Or, is there a point where you say, actually, I'm doing this because I can't do this on Bitcoin, and if there was a near equivalent, I actually probably would prefer that?
Yeah, so I would say I'm probably interested in risk-adjusted returns, right? So if Bitcoin had, and it doesn't, but if Bitcoin had a way to do those things in a way that does not require me to trust any party, then that would mean the risk would be lower. And if the risk is lower, then I will be able to accept lower returns to a degree, right? So, if, for example, some centralized chain allowed 20% returns, and the Bitcoin chain could, but it doesn't, but let's assume that it did allow me to make 15% returns, and I would realize that that's much safer, then of course I would probably go with that. But right now that's not the case. So, basically on the Bitcoin main chain, you can't do any of those things, which is fine. I don't think that's what it's built for. It's not a criticism of it. It's just an honest look of what it is. And on other chains, you can make sometimes significant returns, many times because they're incentivized by various parties, but that doesn't matter in a practical sense. So, I mean, do your risk analysis, and absolutely, I will definitely say that the further down the risk curve you go, your risk obviously increases. So take that into account, and maybe you don't want to take that much risk. That's fine. I can totally understand that. But I don't think that offering risk is a scam, and I don't think that it's necessarily impractical. So, or, I don't think it hurts my ideology either, because once you do what you wanted to do, you take those incentives and then you put it back into Bitcoin, you actually helped the cause. You took the money that people threw away in order to support some other chain, and you put it into the cause that you care about. But yeah, I would definitely agree with you. Again, if there's a way to do those things with less risk, and the return, the potential return is similar, then yeah, you would prefer that for sure. So, but I guess my point is, I try to look at those things objectively. I don't care which technology they use, and I don't care about anything. I look at the properties that they have, and I look for what makes the most sense at the moment, and adjust it to risk, of course, and then that's what I'll choose. I think that's just the practical way to go about it.
So I think that's certainly one way to go about it. And there's quite a lot of people out there who have this monetary, or profit maximalist mindset, right? They're not Bitcoin maximalists, they're profit maximalists. And maybe they want to benchmark their profits in Bitcoin, like it sounds like you do.
True, yeah.
But I also think that there's a whole other aspect to Bitcoin, which is what made Bitcoin valuable in the first place, right? Bitcoin has, I've often described Bitcoin as a get-free scheme dressed up as a get-rich-quick scheme, right? So it's like you come for the sick gains, but you stay for the personal liberty and the sovereignty. And I think that for me and for a lot of people, Bitcoin represents more than just the ability to make money. It represents the ability to imagine and create a different, more open, more fair, less surveilled world where everyone can participate in a global economy and trade amongst themselves and transact amongst themselves without intermediaries, and where their the money that they rely upon is not inflated away in arbitrary and sometimes opaque ways. And so, over the last few years, you would have done better. For example, you, Udi, as a profit maximalist, you'd have done better holding Ethereum than holding Bitcoin. But I don't think that you would. And so so there's one thing, and the second thing, and even though I don't want to be a shill here, but I will plug the fact that I think that Sovryn right now represents absolutely the safest way to use your Bitcoin on these systems, on any smart contract system, and is also offering you on your Bitcoin something like 100% per annum yield right now, or slightly more actually. So I think if you aren't already yield farming on Sovryn, you should definitely consider it, because I think even on your risk-adjusted basis, it makes a lot of sense. But again, I think you say this profit maximist thing, but you haven't been holding Ethereum over the last year and a half, have you?
Well, first of all, the fact that you didn't maximize your profits doesn't mean that you're not trying to. So, maybe if I knew for sure 2 years ago that Ethereum would outperform Bitcoin over 2 years, then maybe I would have. I just thought it wouldn't, and that's one thing. But I did the whole Ethereum over multiple periods of time in my life. I probably sold Ether for Bitcoin at a much higher ETH BTC price than it is right now, probably almost double. So I'm not a stranger to holding ETH for certain periods of time, and I'm not promising that I will never do it again. And also, just to be fair, while I consider myself, I'm definitely more interested in looking at my portfolio in BTC terms long term than in ETH terms. But to be fair, the Ethereum community is also interested in those values you're talking about, like freely moving money around and to a certain degree privacy. And I will say there's less emphasis on it than there is in Bitcoin, but that doesn't mean that Ethereum people don't care about it at all. I would say most of them do, and again, practically, they can use Ether in a pretty free way right now, right? Like, if I hold some BTC and someone else holds ETH, it'll be very difficult for you to convince this other person that they're not able to freely move their funds and that they don't have control over their money and so on. And I, of course, I'm not saying there are no differences. Of course there are, and that's why I'm very bullish and interested in Bitcoin in the long term. Of course, Bitcoin is more predictable and it's more stable and so on. And I think those are great things. But that doesn't mean that the Ethereum people don't care about this at all and don't get those benefits at all. They do. So my choice of denominating portfolios in BTC is because I think that's long-term the right thing to do from a profit maximizing standpoint as well over the long term. And we'll see.
So, Udi, maybe give us your investment thesis. Why is Bitcoin going to outperform all other tokenized assets over the long term?
It's not.
It's
not because it's simple. It's simple math, right? Let's say I started a lemonade stand right now, okay, and that lemonade stand is going to be worth zero at the moment I started. Maybe it'll be worth a little more because it's me and people like my lemonade, but it's not going to be worth a lot. But then maybe I'm really good at it and I'm going to make it a huge franchise, a global franchise of lemonade stands. It's going to be worth many billions of dollars. Then it's almost guaranteed to outperform Bitcoin percentage-wise because it grew from nothing into something in a few years, and the something can be very big. So it will outperform. And you're going to have tons of businesses started all around the world that will outperform Bitcoin. That's the point of Bitcoin being money and businesses not being money. So you're pretty much guaranteed that successful businesses will outperform Bitcoin, especially from their earliest stages until they grow into being a big, successful business. Now, you could make other arguments. You could say maybe on average, Bitcoin will outperform most businesses or all businesses on average. Like you would say, most of them are going to fail and some 5% of them are going to succeed and outperform Bitcoin, but the rest will not. So on average, Bitcoin is going to outperform them. Maybe, although most people would consider that a very sad, pessimistic estimation, because most people who believe in the importance of innovation and growth believe and would hope that on average, the productive growth of society will outgrow the value of money. Now, but that's debatable. Let's say that's debatable. But if you believe that you can pick successful businesses, and it's ridiculous to assume that that's impossible to do, because of course people have done it for thousands of years. So if you believe that you can pick the better businesses that have a better chance of succeeding than others, then you're probably going to outperform Bitcoin. There's no way around it. The only way around it is if you believe that society is going to collapse and any type of value created by anything is just going to zero, and the only thing that people will want to own is Bitcoin. And maybe that's a distinct possibility. It might happen. I'm just not particularly interested in that version of the future. I know some people are, but I don't think it'll happen, and I hope it won't. So I'm trying to not go there too far. If it happens, I'll be fine though, because I have some stats, but I hope that it doesn't.
So I'll present to you my vision for this. And I'm interested in your thoughts, right? So I think Bitcoin is going to continue to grow at a rapid pace. The crypto industry is going to continue to grow at a rapid pace. And I don't mean just Bitcoin, I mean a whole assortment of tokens. And because I think we're currently in the process for many reasons, of tokenizing very, very significant parts of our economy. And that what that's going to unlock is a huge amount of value, which is going to accelerate economic growth significantly. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the tokenized economy 10 or 15 years from now was a $200 trillion economy. So why do I think this? We've got, at the core of it, it's because we have a new type of property rights. This is a massive innovation. I would say that this is the core innovation of Bitcoin. It created non-violent digital property rights. And it did, and because those property rights are digital, they exist in a frontier that is infinite. And so that includes what people today are calling the metaverse. So, games, social media, NFTs, all of the various ways in which people are going to be generating real economic value now that they have the ability to do so in a non-geographic sense. It also means that people in Nigeria who are becoming extremely accustomed to Bitcoin, as well as people in Turkey or Iran, are able to engage with the global economy. And, economists have long said that the one policy that we could do to double global GDP was allow effectively free immigration. Because why are people in some countries poor and in other countries rich? Nothing inherently about the people. It's got to do with the systems that they live under. And particularly, it's got to do with the stability of the property rights that they have access to. So you give people better property rights. For example, they immigrate to the US, they immediately become wealthier, which basically means that they've immediately become more productive. And then you have the ability for capital to move to wherever it needs to move. And these become very, very powerful drivers, which are able to unlock latent creativity, latent innovation, for people around the world. And I think this is all going to happen in a time of increasing technological change, just generally. So I think we're going to see massive growth. And I wouldn't be surprised if in 15 years from now, the tokenized economy, the cryptographic economy, is larger than the rest of the economy combined. The question is, how is that economy going to look? And is it going to be built around Bitcoin? And I think this is a relatively near-term thing. If it is built around Bitcoin, Bitcoin will continue to outperform pretty much everything else, certainly everything outside of the tokenized economy. But if it isn't, and I don't think there is any guarantee that it will be, then I'm not so sure. Then Bitcoin could be relegated to effectively digital gold in the same way that we have gold, physical gold in the physical economy. It's an important asset, but not a core or central asset. So just give you one scenario, and then you can riff off of that. Right? We've now started to see gaming, and I'm talking to people who are running game companies, very experienced people who have built successful games, starting to look to introduce the ability for people to own assets, which can also be used in other games, introduce tokenization into their games because they recognize that people really, really love the fact that they can play and take away an actual souvenir which isn't controlled by the game. People, who from the industry are telling me that this is what they're starting to do. Right? There are hundreds of millions of gamers. They're all very, very digitally native. If Bitcoin doesn't have an easy way to be integrated and to secure these different assets, they're going to be built on other chains, which means that hundreds of millions of people are going to have a lot of economic activity that they're engaged in on a day-to-day basis and they're extremely familiar with, right? That they're actually using for economic activity with all kinds of wallets and all kinds of assets that are not Bitcoin assets. It means that they'll be walking around with phones in their pockets which have value on them that they can spend in stores. And this, again, is not connected to the Bitcoin ecosystem. And so Bitcoin will be, the inert gold of that system. But it won't be the primary settlement system. It won't be the primary asset. It won't even necessarily be the reserve asset. In a world where, the entire space, its critical path evolved away from Bitcoin. And so I think it's up to Bitcoiners and our ability and willingness to continue to innovate ruthlessly. If we want to make sure that Bitcoin, as the freest, as the most certain, asset developed by the space, continues to play the role of the central asset of the space.
Yeah, so I struggle with this because I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with you on the critical importance of it. I'm genuinely not sure though, because I might agree with you. I really don't know yet, but because I think that the digital gold component is so important that it might be worth it to kind of sacrifice other elements for it. However, that goes back, Yago, to back to when probably the both of us kind of got interested in Bitcoin. Pretty much the entire world of digital assets back then would be priced in Bitcoin terms. So you would go to like exchanges like Bittrex or Poloniex or before that we had like Cryptsy and whatever, a bunch of things that people don't even remember anymore. And you would go and look at prices of all those altcoins, all of this digital economy that was starting to form back then. And of course, it was in many ways ridiculous, but it was the precursor of what we're seeing today. All of it was priced in Bitcoin. It was literally the only option. And anyone who was kind of playing around with these assets had a single goal in mind, and that was to accumulate more Bitcoin over time. So everyone denominated their portfolios in Bitcoin. Everyone was trading these digital assets against Bitcoin. And fast forward to today, it almost doesn't happen at all anymore. Like people almost don't even know that they can trade these assets versus Bitcoin. In some cases, they literally cannot. And mostly you would have either stable coins that replaced Bitcoin as the denomination for these pairs, or recently with growing popularity, you have ETH that people use to buy NFTs, and they use them to buy a bunch of various DeFi coins and stuff. And Bitcoin has really lost its dominance there. Like it nearly disappeared. It used to be 100% dominant in the asset that people saw as the base of the digital economy. And now almost no one uses it this way anymore. And I think it's very difficult to look at that and not see it as a regression. If you believe in Bitcoin as the best digital money that exists, then you have to see that and say, okay, something went wrong. Because if you think that Bitcoin is the best digital money, then how the hell did we lose that dominance? I'm not talking about market cap dominance. I think that's bullshit. But I mean the dominance of Bitcoin being used as the asset that people trade against. That all but disappeared. And I think that's a very, very bad sign. And I would love to see it reverse. I don't know if it can at this point, but it's definitely a bad sign. So I think in that sense, that's something I would love to see more focus on. As I said before, I don't particularly care if people use the Bitcoin chain or secured by Bitcoin miners. I know that our opinion probably differs there, Yago. I care that people use the Bitcoin asset. And if they don't, then I think that points to a problem, because if we believe that it's the best form of money, then why aren't people using it? Why are they choosing other forms of money to denominate their trades and to denominate their assets they bought and their gaming stuff and whatever it is? I think that points to a problem.
Yeah, so in terms of pointing to the problem, I think you're absolutely right, and we both agree. I think for me, it's less about necessarily secured by Bitcoin, although I think that's important as well, because I would like to see these transactions helping to provide to the Bitcoin security budget, right? I want Bitcoin miners, because I also think that proof of work is superior to proof of stake in terms of not being manipulable. But I might be wrong on that. But I want to see Bitcoin proof of work continue to be highly viable, and you can see how much value is being driven by Ethereum transaction fees. I would like to see a significant chunk, or even more than that, right? Because I think the actual opportunity is larger if we could have smart contracts for Bitcoin, and that would substantially increase the profitability of Bitcoin mining and substantially increase the Bitcoin mining security budget. But more important to me is exactly what you pointed to, which is that I want to see Bitcoin, the asset, have and continue to play a central role. And just like you say, I think it has, to a degree, been losing that role. And that is sort of, I've always thought of as the default situation. We would, as I said, be very lucky if for good money drove out bad. Bad money typically drives out good because elites can't manipulate good money, and so they support bad money in various ways. In the ways that regulators do it for fiat, in the way that VCs do it for whatever happens to be the altcoin du jour. But without having to change Bitcoin's core, which and certainly not its core rules, because that's what Bitcoin is. Right? If it's property rights, it's effectively it's the set of rules that provide those property rights. I think there are the tools like Bitcoin merge mining, like Lightning Network, like Rootstock, right? And that we're trying to integrate this as a cohesive whole with Sovryn to provide a fully functional Bitcoin layer 2 with no or minimal changes to Bitcoin main chain. And I think we have to do this now. We have to be working on this aggressively now, because the space is growing very, very fast. The competition is now. And so, this is why I've been sort of pounding the desk on this topic. I think you and I fundamentally agree that we would like to see Bitcoin the asset, because it is an asset with straight lines, right? It's the number one asset if you're interested in rules without rulers. Bitcoin is the asset for you, and I am, and I think you are, and I think pretty much everyone who's listening to us probably is. And so I want to see Bitcoin continue to play the central role, and for that we absolutely need to make sure it's interoperable with NFTs. It's easily interoperable with games. It's you can have decentralized finance. Decentralized finance, DeFi is just valuable for Bitcoin because you want to be able to use your Bitcoin without intermediaries, right? If it's lending or trading or whatever. But it's also valuable because it sits at the very, very core of the entire economy that we will be building in a tokenized form, and that I think we can and should and must be building around Bitcoin. So, so that's my final rant. How about we open this up to some comments and questions?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome.
Okay, we have Hoodie Stan account. Go ahead. Connecting.
Eric Wall, I see you're here. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Invite him as well. If you want to speak, just have a request and we'll put you up the line. Hoodie, you are connected. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, well, thanks for the invitation. I don't have anything particular to add, but yeah, great show, guys.
You have a great accent, Eric.
Thanks, Udi.
I'm very surprised. Do we not have I'm used to after?
No, we had a million during the conversation, but now everyone thought they're not going to get a chance to speak. I'm now raising a few speakers. Token Pato, go ahead. You go first, buddy.
Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this space. First time that when I was hearing about Sovryn and the DeFi platform for Bitcoin, I was very, very excited because I think DeFi space is the core of the cryptocurrencies. And also Bitcoin, it represents the value of cryptocurrencies and the whole crypto space. After all, Bitcoin is the father and the founder of this decentralized new finance and new technology, what underlies on the blockchain. I just want to tell you all that you have my fully support on this project, like Sovryn, and I'm expecting big things ahead.
All right. Thank you very much for the support. We are working 24/7 to build the DeFi products that Bitcoin users need. And thank you for being with us and staying with us and supporting. Muteness, go ahead. Ask your question or show your support.
Hi guys, and thank you for making this space. It's really helpful. Just a few comments. For Udiverse, I used to be a Bitcoin maxi, but thank you for paving the way for me to just, like, look at things differently. That's really helped me a lot in just changing my perspective. And Yago, just a bit of feedback on Sovryn. I tried to understand Sovryn. I read like 3 times and I couldn't. I would love to support Bitcoin-based companies, but if you can simplify to someone who's not technical like me, it would be really, really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Udi, you want to comment, or I'll jump in?
Yeah, I mean, well, thanks for the kind words first. And, you know, a lot of people are kind of asking me, like, why am I doing this? Or do I think that I can change people from being toxic or whatever? And I'm like, I really don't want to change anyone. I think here's the thing. I think there are a lot of people in Bitcoin. I think the vast majority of people in Bitcoin are open-minded people who are curious and they care about innovation. And I think that they, over time, kind of grew scared to speak up because it became more and more dangerous to say that you're interested in other things recently. And so I'm not trying to change the people who kind of proudly proclaim themselves as toxic and proudly say that they do not want to know what happens outside of Bitcoin. I'm not trying to change those people. What I'm trying to say is it's okay to not be like them. And the more people, get this message and just say, okay, you know what, if it's okay to not be like these people, then I can open my mind and just see and just look into what's going on, and maybe I'll find value in it and maybe not. And that's good enough for me. That's why I'm doing it, not to change people. So I'm glad that that if it helped even one person, I'm glad. And I hope it helps other people too.
Thanks. And yeah, with regards to the complexity of it, we've been putting out some more videos around how to use it. But feel free to reach out to me and tell me sort of like what was confusing or where you got stuck, so that we can, I can help you, but B, it would help me and others figure out how we can make things better.
All right. Thank you very much. Orange Field, you were here in the beginning asking, then you were not here. Go ahead, buddy. Ask your question. You're a long time.
Yeah. Hi, gentlemen. Good morning. Thank you both for all your insights and your inputs. Been following you for quite a while. My question kind of goes back to you, Udi, when you kind of, when I totally agree with this from a business perspective, is risk managed rate of return. And I was just wondering, some of the variables, do you input, because it's taken me a really long time, years, to really sort of go down the rabbit hole of understanding the big picture of Bitcoin. And I think you go through various phases on how you interpret that. And I was just wondering, in your bucket of risks, do you take into account the effects of the other assets or projects and the way they influence, I guess I'll call them important people, or people have big followings, such as famous people, recently the bill that passed in the United States Congress, where they had a whole bunch of bad policy, mainly due to a lot of what I would call just misunderstanding or misinformation, or even intentional regulatory control. So, do you allocate much weight to those longer term issues when you're doing the risk reward of investing in various projects?
So I'm not entirely sure which kind of risk do you mean, like compliance risk and regulatory risk, and how longer term some of these other assets might face, regulatory action? Is that what you mean?
No, thank you for clarifying that, because I didn't really say. More of the risk of how it might negatively input the adoption of Bitcoin at a faster rate. Eventually I kind of agree with you that it will be adopted, but if there are roadblocks or misinformation about, proof of work causing a whole bunch of pollution and all this garbage that once you dig down, it's there. It doesn't mean if we don't have full kind of guns a-blazing to sway people away from these ideas, because even though they're wrong, they still might be well-meaning and implement bad policy that will slow the adoption of Bitcoin. Or even, as Yago says, we take it for granted, we might lose it. Does that clarify a little bit?
Yeah. Thanks for that. So, I think what you're kind of saying is, well, if you choose to support these other networks and many more people choose to support these other networks, then that might help the incorrect narratives that Bitcoin is bad because it's, polluting or uncompetitive or whatever, any number of things that people say, and that maybe like that adds to the risk. Maybe I shouldn't explore these other altcoins because it will end up hurting Bitcoin. And I think, while I understand what you're saying, I think that, again, from a practical standpoint, me saying that some other chain is not going to succeed long term is not going to change the interest of other parties to do everything they can to make it succeed. So again, I think, the most practically beneficial thing you can do is say, okay, if I recognize that there's going to be a bunch of, let's say, big funds that are going to dump a lot of money into these other chains in order to incentivize people to use them, the best thing you probably can do is go there, take the money they're dumping, and put it into Bitcoin. So that way, over time, this strategy will prove to be not very successful, because what will end up happening is that people just dump money to incentivize the use of other chains, and then Bitcoiners come in, they take that money, they put it into Bitcoin. The funds that put the money there, they just lost, didn't gain anything, and Bitcoin gained. So I think that's the way you vote, and that's the way you make a difference. And not just say, well, I don't like their end goals, so I'm not going to participate. I think that's just
I agree with you.
100% agree
with you, Udi. I just was wondering if it weighed into the risk factors of allocating resources. And, I share your point of view, and it's very nuanced and it's very hard to go by. But again, thank you, gentlemen. I'll sign off and let somebody else take the spot.
Thank you very much, Orangefield. We see we have John Light here from the team. Go ahead.
Hey guys, good space. I just wanted to comment a little bit on the point that Udi was making about Bitcoin kind of losing its status as like the unit of account of the crypto economy. Although of course I would love to see Bitcoin regain that status. I think this is partially just mostly just a result of kind of the kind of maturation and diversity of the market, in the sense of, on the side of exchanges mostly moving to denominating pairs in fiat or stable coins. I think that's just an artifact of the or a side effect of the traders kind of denominating their profits in dollars or fiat instead of Bitcoin denominating trades in like maybe individual traders are going to denominate in Bitcoin, but at an institutional level, I think that's fairly uncommon, just for various reasons. But in a way, kind of trading with Bitcoin as a base is almost like when you're denominating your fiats and profits, it's almost like trading a quanto pair or something. It's kind of hard to do the accounting, so it's not unusual from a trading perspective that many of the centralized exchanges have started denominating in fiat. And in terms of the rest of the kind of digital economy going and being denominated in stable coins, or more recently like Ether and other altcoins, I think it's just due to those platforms having these new markets before Bitcoin. Ether is the native token of the Ethereum chain. It's what users need to pay gas. So every user of Ethereum at least starts off with some Ether. And so naturally, when they go to an NFT platform that's built on Ethereum, they're going to need they're going to charge an Ether before they charge in anything else. NFTs don't really have a fixed cost per se, so they don't need to denominate in dollars because their expenses aren't really denominated in dollars, or they don't need to denominate their do their accounting in dollars, so they're happy to take Ether. But if you're buying NFTs on Solana, then they're pricing it in sols. If you're buying NFTs on Tezos, they're denominating it in Tezis. And once you have NFTs on RSK, it'll probably be denominated in Bitcoin. I think the NFTs that are being issued on Liquid are denominated in Bitcoin. So I think it's partially just, a result of where the market is at and where the technology is at, in terms of giving users the option to kind of easily buy things in the native currency of the chain. Maybe one day users will start to be more opinionated, and with technologies like meta transactions, users will be able to hold Bitcoin in their wallet and pay for NFTs with Bitcoin on Ethereum, but technology is not quite there yet. But yeah, I think as the market kind of matures and Bitcoin actually takes on more of a role as money and currency in the real world, quote unquote, and we'll start to see more stuff denominated in Bitcoin. But until then, I think it's going to be either stable coins or whatever the native asset is of the chain, the particular chain that the user happens to be transacting on.
Yeah, and I think you're kind of describing the reasons and the process that this went to and how it happened. I think it's fairly accurate. Definitely, when it comes to trading versus stable coins, it definitely makes a lot of sense from an accounting standpoint and taxation standpoint, and I can totally understand why people choose that. It's more the recent tries of trading versus ETH that I didn't expect, let's say. I was surprised by, and I think that while your explanation of how it happened is pretty accurate, it's still not what I expected to happen. It's not how I thought things will play out. I thought that if people are going to find, one thing is I didn't think people are going to find interest in NFTs. That's the truth. I didn't see that happening. But also I thought that if people would, then those marketplaces would arise on Bitcoin, or not even technically on Bitcoin, but, with traded versus Bitcoin, however they happen. And of course that didn't play out either. So I think it's, while you're right, it just means there are more options now and people are not necessarily choosing Bitcoin as the main option. I think it's still, it's still a signal that we should look at. It's still something that we should take maybe as a warning sign. I don't think that by default necessarily all of this activity will flow back into Bitcoin. Maybe it will, but we will need to make it happen.
Yeah, for sure.
If we
Sorry, go ahead.
That's it. Just that, I don't think there's anything about Bitcoin that guarantees that activity will be denominated in Bitcoin in the future. Like, we lost a lot of ground there, and currently the trend is that we're going to continue to lose ground. And if we want to flip that, we're going to need to do something about it. Is the way I see it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think of a project like OpenSea, they were one of the first NFT marketplaces built on Ethereum. And I don't think it's unreasonable to say, okay, they're early to Ethereum. They're obviously invested in Ether, so naturally they're going to denominate everything in Ether, right? And then the rest of the market just kind of follows the trend. But yeah, I mean, to kind of reclaim that ground, we've got to build NFT marketplaces that, by default price things in Bitcoin. It's a design decision, I think, more than anything else, and the users will kind of follow the design pattern. But yeah, hopefully we start to see more Bitcoiners experimenting in these other digital economies and catering to those markets in a Bitcoin native or at least Bitcoin denominated kind of way. Yeah, that was my comment. Thanks for the feedback there, Udi, and yeah, good space.
Thank you very much, John. Always got some great words to say. John's a very key player in the Sovryn team, and I want to thank you, for all of your contributions. David Siroy, go up next, buddy.
Hey guys, thanks for hosting the call. A lot of you guys are some of my favorite people in the space who are honest about the limitations of Bitcoin, yet still kind of aligned with that ethos. So Yago, early on in the call, you mentioned how ZK, zero knowledge, is this insanely powerful tool. But I'm hoping we can maybe discuss the realistic limitations and perhaps even kind of theoretical application of ZK tech moving forward. And I was hoping maybe we can even get Eric Wall back up here and he could potentially talk about it, because I think he has a very strong understanding of the kind of technical stuff. And it'd just be kind of cool to see him, Yago, maybe Udi, and maybe even possibly John might kind of bounce back and forth on some of that, of why it's so difficult to say we're building on Bitcoin, so to speak.
Well, I think unfortunately Eric seems to have dropped. Let me give a very, very quick overview of what a zero knowledge proof rollup is. Basically what it is it's the ability to take computation off chain, right? So let's say and it could be computation of something simple like making a transaction. So you could make like 1,000 transactions and then have, the aggregated end state proven to the main chain with this type of cryptographic proof, which is called a zero knowledge proof. But it could also be more complicated things like trades or loans, or really anything you could imagine, votes, anything that you can do sort of programmatically can be proven to have happened off-chain to the main chain with a zero knowledge proof. So it's got many advantages, but I think the two big advantages are, one, it provides a path to privacy, and even more clearly, it provides a path to scalability, because you can aggregate a large number of transactions and then bring them, secure them on chain through this zero knowledge proof. And it's different from, although in principle there's something similar there to Lightning Network, where you can do a lot of transactions, and then you sort of like roll them up in a way to main chain. But there are key differences. On the advantage side for zero knowledge proofs is it can do far more complex things between multiple different parties. It's not limited to single, to state channels between two parties. On the downside, you need to more frequently be rolling up. So you can't just have, months and months and months of activity. You basically need to roll up once per block. And then finally, I would say that to do this properly with, directly to Bitcoin main chain, we would probably need to add an opcode, which would allow us to have zero knowledge proofs. And current estimations are that an opcode like like a snark type zero knowledge proof would have the weight of about 10 transactions, 10 sort of standard Bitcoin transactions. But it could be done. We could add such a thing as an opcode. And one of the reasons that I think that's very, very exciting and interesting is potentially it's the last change. That kind of change would potentially be the last kind of change we ever need to add to Bitcoin main chain, because we can then just make any other improvements or changes that we want off chain.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Eric.
Yep. I'll add some things about zero knowledge proofs and ZK rollups. I think that maybe when you're comparing, for example, optimistic rollups with ZK rollups in the context of the EVM, so on RSK and on Ethereum, I think that the scalability gains that you gain from ZK rollups might be a little bit exaggerated compared to optimistic rollups, because what you're really doing is that you're able to skip signature validation in favor of just validating a single ZK circuit. And the more transactions that you put into the circuit, then the more scalability you earn, because validating the circuit it's constant time. So even if you increase the number of transactions, it just means that you'll still validate all those transactions in the same amount of time, but you'll compress more signatures into a single ZK circuit. But what we're still talking about here in this context is validating a zero-knowledge proof. And if you compare that to something like an optimistic rollup, in an optimistic rollup, you don't validate any of the transactions. You just accept them optimistically, and then if someone makes an invalid state transition, if one of the sequencers in the rollup creates an invalid state transition, then that's when validation kicks in. But if the optimistic rollup security model works fine, then you never get to that stage where you actually do have a dispute and you don't need dispute resolution. So no matter how quickly you can make the how quickly you can validate a ZK circuit, it's not going to be necessarily faster than the situation you are in optimistic rollup where you don't validate anything. Of course, you get the benefit that, well, you have validated the transaction, so you can move on and you don't have to be in this quasi-secure state where you don't know if it's secure or not, and you're waiting for a dispute to come in. So you could potentially have faster finality in a ZK rollup. But I don't think that you should expect like massive improvements. One thing that ZK rollups can do compared to an optimistic rollup is that you don't even have to put the signatures on the chain. So because the ZK circuit has all the information from the signatures embedded into itself, so you can just remove them from even having to be posted on the chain. That's not the case for an optimistic rollup where you have to post the transaction signature data on the chain. So in that sense, then ZK rollups can use a little bit less space and therefore cost less in gas. So they have one advantage there, that in terms of the layer 1 data that you need to post, ZK rollups can be a bit faster. But the disadvantage that you are always still validating these signatures. And the other thing that is often not discussed in this context is that with BLS signatures, you can compress, even without using ZK snarks or anything like that, you can compress, or without ZK snarks, you can compress using BLS signatures. You can also compress many signatures into one. So it's not necessarily, I think that the jury's still a bit out on whether or not optimistic rollups or ZK rollups are going to be faster. I personally think that in the near time, optimistic rollups are going to be slightly faster. Because you skip the zero knowledge proof validation. But the other thing in that context is that zero knowledge proof still has tremendous interesting qualities in terms of also providing privacy, not only scalability, but they can also provide privacy. I think it's perhaps more in that context. It's a very interesting complement, and there are combinations between optimistic rollups and ZK rollups. There's, for example, something that just hit testnet now called ZK Opru, which means zero knowledge optimistic rollup. So you have an optimistic rollup that runs ZK snarks to provide privacy. So you can get both the scalability gain from a rollup and the privacy benefits from a ZK snark, and you can combine those two. And I think we'll just continue to see combinations of optimistic frameworks and zero knowledge proofs to provide either scalability or privacy. So the future looks very bright, I would say, with the combination of these technologies. And yeah, I'll add perhaps one last thing, because I think that one thing that people are very interested in is also the possibility all this has to reduce fees. But I think that it might be a bit misguided to think that just because you increase the throughput of a system, you will see necessarily the fees of the system go down, because the fees, of course, it's a function of supply and demand of block space, but it's also a function of what's the level of opportunity available in the system. And if there are tons of like arbitrage opportunities in the system, and you just increase the throughput of the chain, it means that more arbitrage opportunities can come up, and it's not necessarily going to create an environment where you have like transactions that you can make for a couple of cents, because there's still going to be tons of bots doing arbitrage trades that are going to bully you out of the competition. But what you can do with rollups, which is very interesting, is that on the sequencer level, so on the layer 2 level of the system, you can have various forms of ordering in the system. So you can have, for example, a sequencer or a combination of sequencers that actually order transactions based on the order that they come in, and they don't allow people to outbid each other. So you still need some transaction fees to protect against DDoS attacks, but you can experiment in this design space of using other types of ordering mechanisms that don't lead to the same bidding contest and doesn't drive up the fees as much. So there's the possibility for rollups to also harmonize fee environments, both in terms of providing more throughput, but perhaps more primarily by changing the ordering dynamic.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. One quick follow-up, if you don't mind. I read somewhere or heard a rumor that you're potentially working on some sort of proposal with Starkware and Ellie and maybe getting it on Bitcoin main chain. I know that could be years out and it's very theoretical, but is that something that you're working on and that you see as potentially a small path forward as viability?
Yeah, I'm not sure where this rumor started. I don't. Maybe it was even me that started this rumor, but it's. I would say that this rumor is a myth. It's not true. The only thing that happened was that I met the Starkware team in Paris earlier this year, and I was recommending to that. They were talking about how do they get more attention from the cryptocurrency space to their zero knowledge proof technology that they had designed. And I recommended to them that what they should do is, for example, they can create a fork of the Bitcoin repository, which has a zero knowledge, a ZK rollup based on Starks that they can release as a testnet and get Bitcoiners to experiment with it. Because one of the very nice things with ZK rollups or just ZK Starks in general is that compared to a ZK Stark doesn't have a trusted setup, so you don't need to trust anyone to provide you with either scalability or privacy benefits from ZK Starks. And the other very nice, interesting attribute is that in order for ZK Stark to provide a scalability benefit, you don't need to have this complex system of channels, and you don't need to be online when you receive a transaction. So you just have a Bitcoin address or a Stark-based address, and you provide that address, and anyone can send Bitcoins to that address, and you get the scalability benefit of not having to do all the signature validation on the chain. But I mean, this is just something that I've recommended to Starkware if they want to get some attention for the technology. But I think that Starkware has been, like in the recent month, they've been very successful at getting the attention from the community with the launch of Starknet. So, but I did see that Eli has been discussing about actually moving forward with this idea. And I'm not going to be working with them on that idea. I mean, I manage my own cryptocurrency fund and don't have time to, or I don't even have the skill set to contribute to that. But I did see that Laulu from the L&D team picked up on some of those ideas and said that he would offer his help to bring ZK Starks as potentially a BIP that you could work on, or potentially a fork that you could work on. Just a concept to play around with the technology a little bit. But in general, I would say that I'd probably agree with Udi, who says that we don't need to introduce these technologies into Bitcoin quite yet. We can play around with them on top of Ethereum or in sidechains. And when we see that there is a tremendous need for this technology on the base layer of a system, then that is when we perhaps should consider it. But I think it might be too premature to try to force this down in the Bitcoin mainnet pipeline right now.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, David. All right, next up we have Leo, then Rafi, Daniel. As long as Yago and Udi are here, just let's try to keep it to one question per person as long as we can, because we have many people waiting. All right, Leo, go ahead, buddy.
Hi, thank you. I just would like to comment on both of you, on Udi and Yago, and raise a question. From my understanding, Udi, you're totally pro-Bitcoin, and you said, when I get it correct, that you definitely support other projects. However, you see it based on your risk and reward perspective, that as long as you gain money with them, you definitely look forward to put this money back into Bitcoin, because this is your let's say investment where you believe in for the longer term future. And I totally agree with you with that, because it's Bitcoin. But what I was missing in your discussion a little bit, and here it comes to Yago, you're a developer, Yago, and you would like to promote to a certain point also your project. And from this perspective, when you see someone like Udi and he says like, okay, I really like your project and the idea is good, however, it does not fit in my perspective, because there's also a middleman, it's another protocol, and I have to trust them. And how do you tackle people like him in order to make him use your product? Because, there's a gap. There are people who say, okay, there is another smart contract, there's another chain, and then there are also, we can face some problems, and in the worst case, it can occur that I lose money, and how do you both come together, and let's say what would you like to see that Yago does in order to make his project more interesting for you?
So honestly, I do not actually have any reservations with regards to, or any significant reservations, let's say, with regards to the risk profile of using Sovryn. I think that, it's definitely more trust-based than some things you might do directly on Ethereum at this point in time. I would imagine that they have plans to improve that. But it's probably good enough for my needs. So I don't actually have reservations with things like rootstock and Sovryn when it comes to the security mechanism. Although, of course, it is not as robust as Bitcoin itself. But I'm personally fine with that. I know some people maybe aren't, but I'm personally fine with that.
So my strategy to get Bitcoiners to use Sovryn, and just to point out, it's not my project, it's a project that I'm deeply passionate about, but there are many people who are deeply passionate about it. My strategy is I'm going to invite them all one after the other to Twitter Spaces. So that's step one.
Well, that's a good plan. That's a good plan. We already have like 8 people on stage. So.
And now, I think what we need to do is we need to be honest about what we're building, its limitations, and where we want to go. So, rootstock is not Bitcoin main chain. I'm happy that it's not Bitcoin main chain. I wouldn't want to be introducing this level of complexity to Bitcoin main chain. But as a result, when you're using it, you're not using Bitcoin main chain. You're taking on a whole set of other assumptions. It's merge mined with Bitcoin, but it doesn't have 100% merge mining yet. It has, I think, the most trust minimized peg in the world, but it's not a trustless peg yet. This is one of the reasons I'm excited about things like zero knowledge proofs because I think that zero knowledge proofs on Bitcoin could potentially provide us with a truly trustless peg. And so the strategy, from my perspective, is we need to build the best, the most decentralized, the most trustless way of using your Bitcoin, and then constantly improve it until the point that we get to something which is, as close to or basically almost identical to the trust assumptions that you're using when you're using Bitcoin main chain. You'll never get, it's an asymptotic goal, but we'll never quite get there. But if, Sovryn has grown much faster than I thought it would. It's got, hundreds of millions of dollars that it's managed. It's got has had over just the last 5 months, over $1 billion have been traded on Sovryn. And there's tens of thousands of users. If we continue along that trajectory, then at the same time, we have the kind of committed developers and other people like Starkware, working to develop things like zero knowledge proofs, better peg, or better integration with Lightning Network and things like that. Where we'll end up with is we'll have both the technology and the very, very clear community that want to drive this technology that will allow us to, if there are, either discover that there's no need to make any changes to Bitcoin main chain because there's potentially paths that we could reach full trustlessness or near full trustlessness without any changes to main chain, or potentially make minimal changes like introducing an opcode for ZK proofs, which would give us everything that we need. So we need to capture the audience. We need to drive the spirit of innovation. We need to keep our focus on building out the future that we want to build because it doesn't get built out by itself. And we need to, over time, let people know and get more people to understand what it is that we're building and make it as easy, as simple, as joyful to use as possible. And if we do that, I think we help Bitcoin to stay sovereign.
Okay, I got that. Just one question to Yudi. How much percent of your Bitcoin net worth would you put into Sovryn for working right now at the moment, if I'm allowed to ask?
I don't know.
To interrupt you, I just
really
would like to bring you both, together. That maybe Yago is like figuring out some information from this discussion, what he needs to do in order to attract more people like you.
Yeah. So I get that. I personally am very I try to be very flexible in how I allocate. So it will change over time depending on what opportunities exist. With regards to how secure it is, I don't know. I would be fine. So let's I'm not going to discuss my portfolio, but I would be fine deploying whatever I consider at risk on Sovryn if the opportunity presents itself. It's not. I don't consider it particularly risky when compared to other options.
You heard it, guys. Pump the bags. All right. Thank you very much, Leo. Rafi, go ahead. Daniel, you go next.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for listening. I just have I've been with Sovryn project since the beginning, and I've seen it grow an immense amount. I know that it's already been at a show with Invest Answers and with Alcoin Daily, and maybe even already doing some stuff with El Salvador. So my question is, and now with Jack Dorsey stepping down as a CEO, and with previous information that we have that Anthony Pompliano was an early investor for Sovryn. So is there people like Jack Dorsey or, I don't know, Michael Saylor will, maybe put a little bit of Bitcoin on developing Sovryn to a greater potential? Thank you very much. That was my all question, and I'm going to mute myself. Thanks.
I believe that Eric started a rumor that Jack Dorsey was leaving Twitter to become the CEO of Bitcoin now.
Oh, that wasn't me.
All right.
Yago, sorry, Yago. There's one thing that I think you haven't discussed, which would be interesting to bring up in this context, which is that for RBTC, like the RBTC on Sovryn, it's obviously in order to peg out your Bitcoin back to the main chain, then you have these hardware security modules that have to sign off on the peg out transaction. But you can create something on top of Sovryn, a Bitcoin synthetic asset, which works and behaves similar to something like TBTC, the TBTC that exists on Ethereum right now, where you have a different security model where you don't actually need to peg out the Bitcoin to the main chain, but you can have a synthetic asset that is more trustless in a sense. Has there been any developments on bringing such synthetic assets to the Sovryn network? Because then you just need to rely on the security of the Sovryn system, and you don't have to rely on these hardware security models to peg out Bitcoin back to the main chain. So it's not like a multi-sig Bitcoin. It would be a more trustless synthetic asset. I think that could be interesting to people.
So that's an interesting question that you ask. The answer is that not only have we considered it, we've built it. So there's a team that have built this out, and what we originally were planning on doing was not introducing this directly into rootstock, but introducing it into a rollup. We would piggyback off the merge mining of rootstock, but most of our transactions would occur with the synthetic asset of the rollup. We've been a little bit disappointed with the pace of development of rollup technology, and so in the meantime we haven't launched the system that we built out. But the other option is to integrate this or replace the current RBTC peg with a peg like this, and I think that that's a very attractive option. There is so just so that the people who are listening get a sense, right? So the current peg that we use on rootstock is what we call a POW peg. It uses SPV proofs to a set of signatories who also run HSMs, and the signatories need to concur with their HSM based on their signing patterns for transactions to occur. So there are many redundant layers of security there, and it's I think quite secure. But it has one particular advantage over an economic security system, right? Like what Eric is describing is that you would basically be collateralizing your Bitcoin with another asset, in this particular case, SOV. The current peg system is cheaper because you don't have this collateral. But at the same time, it's very, very hard, or it's harder to analyze what its security assurances are. And my preference is for economic assurances rather than, the best is cryptographic assurances. If you can't do cryptographic assurances, I think economic assurances are the next best thing. So that's, a lot of people share my view, so that's why the team have built it out. And I expect that either the original plan of moving it into a rollup or integrating this into the base layer of rootstock is going to be something we'll be doing over the course of the first half of next year.
Okay, that's very interesting.
All right, Daniel, you want to ask a question?
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good morning, guys. Thank you for the mic. I had my question raised a while ago, so I'm probably going to bring it back to something that may not be as technical. So Udi was talking about toxic maximalism in Bitcoin, and I really kind of want to bring the focus on that. It seems like we brush it as something that it's transient, right? Not pun intended, but I'm pretty sure it's here to stay, and And in my experience, I've seen more and more people falling into that category, and more people in the development world, right, of Bitcoin. So my question, kind of comment is, this is probably here to stay and is going to grow. What will be the implications of miners getting into this way of thinking and affecting the development of like what Sovryn is trying to do here, Stacks and other projects on top of Bitcoin? Is that a potential threat to what we know as Bitcoin, and I mean, God forbid, a split of the chain in due to just the the way of thinking?
I will push back on that, Daniel. I don't think that toxic maximalism is here to stay and grow. I'm seeing the opposite, and I think that I think it's gonna grow smaller and quieter simply because it's losing, simply because it's a bad approach, and it's causing damage to the people who profess it. And simply by the law of nature, I think it will slowly disappear. I personally, I'm a bit biased, of course, but from my point of view, it looks like it's already losing relevance quite rapidly. So I don't think that it's going to be an issue, that definitely not on the scale that will affect miners. So miners are, they always have been profit maximizers. That always has been the thing they care about, for practical reasons too, because again, they have to pay the bills. So miners are rarely ideological. They are sometimes, and we've seen what happened with that. Like I would argue that Bitmain's whole ordeal in 2017 was very much similar to the toxic Bitcoin maximalist approach of today, that they just did things out of blind ideology, and that proved to be pretty detrimental in the long term. So I think most miners are not like that, and I don't think that's a concern that anyone should worry about miners making uneconomical decisions. Kind of the basis of why Bitcoin works and why the other crypto networks work too, is because we know that most miners will make smart economical decisions, and the ones who do not will be just losing out the competition. So I wouldn't worry about that.
Okay. No, it's good. It's kind of refreshing to hear that. I just dabble myself in spaces on some Discord channels and things like that, but I don't have as far as rich as you guys here in the panel as far as the Bitcoin. So it's good to hear. It's good to have that refreshing tone that you see this coming down. So that was my only comment. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for the question.
I actually requested to speak to respond to that point, if I may, Judas.
Sure, go ahead, Exit.
So I don't think we actually have a Bitcoin maximalist problem. I think we have toxic individuals. And you find toxic individuals in every community in and outside of crypto. So basically there's people who are assholes, and they express their view in an assholey way, whether it's Bitcoin or Ethereum or Cardano or XRP. And I think that also we're in a zeitgeist of an incredibly polarized society that finds it hard to talk to each other, and views are extreme across all communities and all themes at this point in time. And I agree with Udi that toxic maximalism is losing. I started muting those types of voices that I listened to early in the Bitcoin space reluctantly. I don't want to name names, but about 2 years ago, I just muted them out of my timeline because they brought nothing to the table. And also, I think that that Yago and Udi both have in the last half year made incredible inroads in getting Bitcoiners to start being experimental again and to question things. So I'm definitely in agreement that maximalism won't stay, and agree as well with the profit maximalization of miners.
I just remember my last question. I promise it will be quick. And this is to Sovryn related. So I found the project a while ago. I guess they have this cool, badger icon. And I never got to use it. I never got to use the project. But I really, really, really like the idea of this DeFi over Bitcoin. So for the question for the group is, what will, I need to take this leap of faith. And I think a lot of people are in the same space. So what would you say will take me to that leap of faith? What is Sovryn doing right now that will push me to, okay, it's time for me to move some of my Bitcoins into this project?
Well, the way I think about it is sort of, how did I get into Bitcoin? Right, I heard about Bitcoin. I then wasted a few months thinking about it. I then bought the smallest amount of money which I could, put into Bitcoin. And I started learning. I started going down the rabbit hole. And then, I was lucky because that was 2011. But at the time, I thought I was late. And of course, I was angry at myself for not being more aggressive about it early on. But I don't think you need, the question is this something which is exciting to you? Is it something which is maybe valuable for you or valuable in the future? And if so, the best thing to do is dip your toe. Don't rush into anything. Don't cannonball into it. But if it's interesting, try it out. And if you're looking for an excuse, it's extremely profitable to do right now. There's a whole bunch of incentives on the system. And if you can figure out how to unlock them, and I don't think it's that hard, and it's getting easier all the time, every day that you waste is a day you'll regret later.
I have a little bit different answer to that question. I think that, the trade-off, it's just looking at the trade-off of whether you want composability of the EVM or not. And this is what Ethereum provided and built out. It's this whole reason for being is Vitalik was kicked out of Bitcoin forums for suggesting the ideas. And Sovryn
that's not really true.
And Sovryn has picked up on the EVM composability, and there's a trade-off in the security guarantee. And so it's just a question of whether you want to accept that change in security guarantees for the advantage of the composability, which allows you to earn on your Bitcoin or not. I think is the question that I would ask myself. And if you think yes, we're of the opinion that Sovryn's the best place that you can do that at the moment on the RSK chain.
Guys, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll put myself to listener.
Thanks, Daniel. Thank you, Exile, for chiming in. Aiden, seen you here for a while. Want to jump in?
Hi, guys. Kind of a two-part question for Udi and Yago based on the volcano bonds in El Salvador. One, do you think, if successful, it will be a massive change in macroeconomics for El Salvador? And two, maybe a question for Yago is on the Sovryn. Would it be something that Sovryn could do in the future, issue bonds for nation states? Thank you, guys.
Udi, you want to go first? Sure. Yeah, I don't know much about government bonds of any form. I think the experiment is cool, right? So I hope it goes well, and I imagine it will. But that's all I can say about it. Yes, I'd make 2 points. One is, I think
this is where I was expecting this would go. The fact that El Salvador now have access to an alternate form of finance, an alternate form of financing, which isn't the gatekeepers aren't New York, London, and Dubai, is a huge advantage for them. And for us as a community, it's an opportunity to support something, to support a vision of the future that we believe in. I am not, particularly excited about governments, even if they accept Bitcoin. But the fact that Bitcoin sovereignty scales to the point where individuals and companies and countries can seek to increase their sovereignty by using Bitcoin, I think is part of Bitcoin ethos. And with regards to whether or not this is the kind of thing that I think will be built on Sovryn, absolutely. I would go further. I think what we'll start to see is Bitcoin birthed sovereign nations, that are Bitcoin native, are governed by DAOs, and I would like to see Sovryn be the platform that helps birth them.
Yeah, totally. I think the structure of this bond is really interesting, right? It allows El Salvador to bypass the capital controls by IMF. But at the same time, I personally have concerns in terms of how this bond is implemented, right? Specifically, what they did is they did a dollar-denominated debt, fundamentally on top of stable coins. And this may not necessarily position this Bitcoin bond in the best light in a kind of geopolitical landscape, specifically with the United States.
Well, interestingly enough, there's been a nice tertiary effect from El Salvador accepting Bitcoin now and declaring it as a valid national currency, is that right now England is looking at having to change their capital gains taxation on this because traders have figured out the loophole that they don't have to pay capital exchange taxes on foreign exchange. And so the British government now is actually looking at how it is to integrate this into their tax structure. So aside from the bond issuance fact, just having a nation state adopt Bitcoin is going to have a lot of roll-on effects that we're going to see going across all regulatory frameworks, I think.
Yeah, I think it's likely to assume that governments will accelerate their efforts to co-opt stablecoins so that they have a better control of the underlying markets. That's something that we probably going to see quite a bit in the States, in the United States. They did make certain moves to attempt to regulate Tether, and I think we're gonna see a lot more of it in the future in 2022.
So I think that this would be a great point for Yago to speak about the strategy behind Zero and Mint in this respect, from a decentralization perspective.
Thanks for the segue, Exiled. So I'll be brief to allow more people to ask questions, but my feeling has been for a long time that it would take a very long time for us to see Bitcoin volatility reduced to the point that it can be used as a unit of account or a medium of exchange. I think the path towards Bitcoin being used as a currency is that we need to be able to remove the volatility from Bitcoin. And we already know that stablecoins are extremely popular, but they're not particularly secure against all of the regular problems of centralization, bankruptcy, regulatory risks, technological risks. We don't really have anywhere in the world a truly decentralized stablecoin which isn't algorithmic. And so there's a number of protocols that are being developed now and are coming to fruition over the coming weeks, which will introduce Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, as well as the ability to take out zero interest rate loans collateralized by Bitcoin on Sovryn. And I think that these stablecoins can have use beyond just the Sovryn ecosystem, across the entire crypto ecosystem and across the entire economy. They can be particularly powerful in helping to harmonize between the USD legal tender and the Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador. But from my perspective, I think the one of the biggest things that we can do, probably the closest things that brings us to true game over, is having a truly decentralized stablecoin, because I think that frees currency from the current control of central banks, and what stablecoins represent, to the extent that they are actually decentralized, are competitor products to our existing central bank fiat-based system.
Yeah, I mean, like in the future, like when we think about hyper Bitcoinization, right? I mean, fundamentally, the reason that merchants will move on to Bitcoin is because that's going to be the only stable pricing mechanism for them. Because I mean, everything else is going to become unstable, right? Especially as the fiat and variety of fiat artifacts, right, become completely debased, right? Merchants just won't be able to price goods and services for into anything other than Bitcoin. I mean, that's fundamentally going to be the primary driver for merchants to switch to Bitcoin as and the Bitcoin becoming fundamentally a unit of account. So basically, I personally don't necessarily disagree with the efforts of creating like maybe either quote unquote beta stable coins, but the end of the days, right, is that once we are on a Bitcoin standard, right, there's not going to be a need for any stable coins or any other coins, right, because most of the goods and services will be priced in Bitcoin because there's going to be no other way.
I don't know if you were here for earlier in the discussion, but I think we discussed what the path towards a Bitcoin standard is in terms of unit of account. I think both Udi and I felt that that's quite a ways away if we work really hard at it, and will never happen if we don't, because we need Bitcoin's volatility to a degree saturate, and we also need it to become the central reserve currency for the economy of tomorrow, the economy that could be built around Bitcoin and certainly will be built around tokenization and crypto. So I don't think that kind of Bitcoin itself as a unit of account is something that we see sort of in the maybe towards the end of the coming decade, but not before that.
I had a really good idea.
I mean, totally. I don't want to.
I'm just going to throw out there that
okay,
I'm going to jump out in 5 minutes. So just to let you guys know, go on.
Yeah, totally. I don't want to comment on timing. I mean, it's not going to happen, of course, tomorrow. But the volatility actually, again, in my opinion, is going to be taken care of organically by institutions and states coming into Bitcoin because, again, they have no choice but to have an exposure to Bitcoin as an asset on their balance sheets. Right, and the reason they're going to do it is because they're going to feel those institutions and of course states, right? They're going to feel an increased pressure from investors, local as well as international, because investors we're going to tell them, look, in order to de-risk you as a business, you have to put some portion of your balance sheet on Bitcoin. So once they do, Bitcoin will see an enormous inflow of liquidity, and that's going to essentially help stabilize its pricing, in my opinion.
I think something we could do actually to help with using Bitcoin as a unit of account, as a method of exchange, medium of exchange, while it's bootstrapping as a global reserve currency, is consider whether or not it makes sense to adopt Bitcoin moving average price for exchange. I mean, if central bankers could make fractional reserve banking work, I think Bitcoiners can make Bitcoin work as a unit of exchange, unit of account in purchases if we dampen volatility by just accepting Bitcoin on a 7-day moving average price or something in commerce. I think that might be a really useful movement if we could manage to make that work. What do you guys think? No need for stable
I
coins.
find the word Bitcoin volatility to be really funny, to be honest. I think what we're seeing is fiat volatility reflected in Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. That's a good point. But that's correct what you said. But essentially, what we're talking about is a stable pricing mechanisms for merchants, right? So they can price the majority of goods and services in a particular currency. Currently, they opt for fiat because there is no other choice. But in the future,
isn't that essentially the role that stablecoins is playing right now?
Well, to a certain degree, yes, but not at a global scale.
Okay, guys, we have a few more. Udi has only 3 minutes, so let's. I wanted him to have some ending remarks. Then, if Yago has some time, or anyone is up to, we'll keep the space open for discussion.
Cool, awesome. Yeah, exactly. I think we should definitely give Udi some closing time.
So go ahead, Udiverse. Floor is yours. We know you like it.
Yeah, just buy Ethereum, guys. I'm kidding. It's a joke. It's a joke.
Udi, one last question. So do you remember about 1.5 years ago, I asked you, what are we going to call Bitcoiners that use their Bitcoin to chase after DeFi opportunities in the EVM? And you said we're going to call them Jerrys. Are you a Jerry now? And does that make me a Tom?
Wait, what's a Tom?
Well, Tom and Jerry, the cat-mouse game.
No, the Jerry is from Rick and Morty.
I know. It's just a joke.
The jokes have to be funny. No, yes, I'm a Jerry now.
Congratulations.
But what did I want? Did I have actual closing statements? I don't even know. I think this was a cool space, and I think Yago, this is a good discussion to have. Hopefully, you get to have this discussion with people who are more important and smarter than me, and because I think
well, I've been waiting to
like your plan of having. I think Yago's plan of converting one Bitcoiner at a time through doing spaces with them is a good one, and it might just work. So, Brad, you can carry that torch too.
Udi,
well, I have a
question
for Eric.
Sure, but let's just Udi needs to run. So Udi, thank you so much for joining us. It was great having you. We'll definitely do this again sometime. Maybe we'll see what the next evolution after Jerry is. And I think Eric, maybe we can also do one at some point. So I'm also going to have to jump soon, but I'll stick around for one more question. And the question I think Superbolic wants to ask of Eric.
See you, Udi. Okay, Eric, you were talking about the roll-ups thing earlier, and I wanted to hear your thoughts on the risks, the centralizing risk factors of optimistic roll-ups. Like, the reason I thought that they moved from optimistic roll-ups to ZK roll-ups was because optimistic roll-ups are not scalable. They don't give you the logarithmic scaling or whatever of ZK roll-ups. And optimistic roll-ups, I thought the drawbacks were that it was, you need to have node runners stake a whole bunch of coins so that they can be punished if they try to cheat. And it relies on node operators, and doesn't it, with MEV and Ethereum, we've seen that the culture is kind of all about accepting bribes to make money. So wouldn't optimistic roll-ups with that requirement be risky? More so than ZK roll-ups?
No, I think what you just said is categorically untrue. Optimistic roll-ups, in reality, at least if you allow optimistic roll-ups to leverage BLS signatures, they are as scalable, if not more scalable, than ZK rollups are.
What's a BLS signature?
It's a signature that you can that supports cross-signature aggregation. So it means that you can have 15 people signing their transactions, and you can aggregate all of those transactions into one, and it proves that all the outputs were spendable because a single signature provides the existence of an endless amount of signatures. So you can aggregate all the transactions into one. And if you think about the scalability benefit that a ZK rollup provides, it is that you can aggregate many signatures into one. So it's essentially the same type of scalability benefit. You don't need to provide the ZK rollup scalability benefit into the signature aggregation, because you can use BLS signatures to do that. So that's something that's possible. Currently, we don't see any optimistic rollups use BLS signatures, but that's probably going to be something that's going to happen later on. So in the long term, when optimistic rollups use BLS signatures, then they're not going to be limited by the fact that you still need to post the signatures on the layer 1, which ZK rollups doesn't need to do. So they will have the same amount of data that needs to be posted on the main chain. There are some people that are saying that ZK rollups do provide you with other types of compression strategies on the layer 1 that supersedes even optimistic rollups, but I don't know what those attributes are exactly. So that's still an unknown for me. But to make it more simple, in optimistic rollups, what you do is you post a transaction that you want to make, and you post a signature for that transaction that you want to make on the chain. And the only thing that you skip is actually validating the transaction. In a ZK rollup, you post the transaction that you want to make. You don't post the signature, and then you for every batch of transactions, you do validate a zero-knowledge proof that validates the existence of those signatures. But in an optimistic rollup, you don't need to validate anything unless there's a fraud proof that gets posted. So optimistic rollups, in order to allow an optimistic rollup to maintain a state and understanding what that state is, there is no additional work that needs to happen on the optimistic rollup than compared to the ZK rollup. So to answer your question, no, optimistic rollups are not less scalable. It does not lead to more centralization than ZK rollups do. It's in fact ZK rollups that have this added load on them, where they actually need to validate continuously zero-knowledge proofs in order to move forward. They get one aspect that is beneficial for doing this, which is that they get a quicker time to finality. But you can have soft versions of confirmations in an optimistic rollup where the sequencer provides you a guarantee that your transaction will be included, and if there's a fraud proof that rolls back the transaction, then the sequencer will lose his deposit. So you can have these soft confirmations that give you a quick finality in an optimistic rollup too. So quick finality is not exclusive to ZK rollups either. So I don't know who has told you that the optimistic rollups are less scalable and lead to more centralization. Actually, both ZK rollups and optimistic rollups have a scalability limitation that if you want to keep track of what the state is inside them, you need to run a layer 2 node in order to track those in order to track that state. You need that state in a ZK rollup in order to be able to make a withdrawal back to the main chain, and you need that state in an optimistic rollup in order to produce a fraud proof. So actually, in both systems, you need to on an ongoing basis keep track of the state and the state transitions in the layer 2 in order for this system to be secure. And that's the same scalability bottleneck. The advantage of rollups is that not everyone in the system has to do this. Only the people that have an interest in the rollup needs to do this, but the main chain can be perfectly secure regardless if anyone tracks those state transitions or not.
So why does optimistic rollups then? I guess I don't understand why do they have this construct where they've got staking required and like slashing penalties for people that are trying to publish false states or whatever, versus ZK rollups that doesn't require that.
Well, yeah, well, actually, optimistic rollups don't require that either. You can have a sequencer that has a bond that they're tied to, in order to give soft confirmations, so that you accept that a transaction has happened and it's not going to be rolled back before either a fraud proof or a validity proof has been posted. But so they're not having those bonds is just something that provides faster confirmations, and also decreases the risk of a sequencer turning malicious and trying to censor transactions, because well, he has a bond in the system. But it's not something that is exclusive or that is required by an optimistic rollup. You can, for example, have an optimistic rollup that has no bond, and you just wait until the window for a dispute has passed, which is usually around 7 days or something like that. If you're okay with waiting 7 days in an optimistic rollup for each transaction to finalize, then you don't need any bonds. A bond is only there so that you can know that if the sequencer cheated in any way, then he will get on top of having the transactions rolled back at the end of the dispute window. He will also lose his bond. So it's a way to give a financial incentive for the sequencer to stay honest, but both rollups and zero knowledge ZK rollups are protected by the base layer itself, and you don't need extra bonds to make them secure. That's the whole idea of rollups, is that you don't need any bonds or any extra economic incentives for the system to be secure. Anyone that has access to the layer one is able to deposit and withdraw to the rollup without the sequencer being able to harm them in any way. That's the fundamental security guarantee that the rollup provides.
Eric, don't Arbitrum have substantially less than 7 days for dispute window?
I don't think so. I think it's 7 days, but I might be wrong.
I thought I actually remember. Last time I looked at it, I thought they'd settled on actually a window which was less than a day.
It could be. Could be. It's definitely possible. 7 days is just the amount of time that you want to allow for a fraud proof to happen, but you can have a shorter dispute window. So it's just a design decision. Like the longer your dispute resolution window is, the higher probability it is that you will have someone that posts the fraud proof in time. So it's like in Lightning, for instance. Like how long do you want to give everyone to dispute an invalid channel state to the main chain and dispute that? Like, if you do want to give them a week, do you want to give them 1 day? That's why the standard has been like 7 days, because that's enough time for anyone to start up a new rollup node, validate all the transaction, and then dispute something if they found an inconsistency there. But if they opted for a shorter window, then that's a little bit of a compromise on security, I would say. Not fatal, but still a compromise.
Arbitrum is an optimistic rollup sidechain, or is that a different type of rollup?
No, it's an optimistic rollup. It's the only optimistic rollup of any material size that has active fraud-proof resolution right now.
I thought
rollup
Optimism also was like deployed on Uniswap or something a while ago.
Yeah, but they don't have fraud proofs activated yet. They still right now it's maybe it would be without fraud proofs. It's hard to even call something an optimistic rollup, but Optimism doesn't have live fraud proofs on the.
It's optimistically an optimistic rollup.
So who's running the nodes for optimistic rollups? Like, who would it be? The people that already run Ethereum nodes, or would it be different people?
Well, anyone. The nice thing about running an optimistic rollup node is that you get instant confirmation. Right, so if you don't want to wait 7 days for a dispute resolution window to pass, you can validate all the state transitions by looking at the on-chain data and verifying that the transaction is not invalid. If the transaction is not invalid, you know that nobody can post a fraud proof that proves that this transaction was invalid. So if you want to, for example, run a merchant software or something that accepts transactions right as they get posted to the main chain, which they are in an optimistic rollup on an ongoing basis, you don't have to wait 7 days. So if everyone that's just interested in instant confirmations, they are incentivized to run an optimistic rollup node. So that could be tons of people, but also in most optimistic rollup designs, you also have this additional benefit that if the optimistic rollup sequencer does post an invalid state transition, you do get to claim a bond that he has deposited. So they're also bribing people to do this validation, like anyone can do it, and they get to claim the bond if the sequencer does something malicious. So there are people that are inherently incentivized to do it because they want instant confirmations, and there are other people that would be economically incentivized to do so.
So is the bond thing, I mean, I don't think anybody really saw the rise of miner extracted value on Ethereum. So like, what is the thought there that won't just happen on optimistic rollups if there's an incentive for somebody to post a fraudulent proof and they make more money from being paid to do that than they do with the bond that they lose? Like, what's the thinking to prevent that from happening? Or it's just like miner extracted value on the sidechain?
So are you asking, like, why wouldn't an optimistic rollup sequencer try to exploit the system and forfeit the bond? Won't the value that they're able to extract be more than the value that they forfeit?
Yeah, if this becomes the dominant scaling for Ethereum, and like, you know, the majority of transactions are happening in these optimistic sidechains or on one optimistic sidechain or whatever, and a miner can make, I don't know how this could work. I was just thinking that miner extracted value is kind of like culturally accepted on Ethereum. So why wouldn't that also go to
a sequencer doesn't really need to do it the way I think you described, Eric. The sequencer basically has the ability to pick and choose how they're going to sequence. And so under most constructions that I've seen, there's a great deal of trust that is placed in the sequencer to actually, you know, honor the sequencing order in which they receive things. It's actually, I think, very hard to prove what order they actually receive transactions in. Or am I wrong?
No, you're right. I didn't say that. I mean, the sequencer is ultimately the actor that posts the transactions to the mainnet. So he decides on the ordering, and if the sequencer is malicious, then he can definitely manipulate the order and be solely responsible for sandwiching thousands of users. And this is one of the reasons that you put a bond there. So if the sequencer would engage in this activity of sandwiching users, front running them, extracting as much MEV as possible, you basically just the sequencer, you can in order to detect this kind of behavior, you can't really do it. You can't really do that like algorithmically and say that that the main chain nodes can detect this behavior and then throw him out of the system and claim his bond, because there's no way to reach consensus that proves that this sequencer actually did this. But what you can do is that if you have, for example, an optimistic rollup which has a governance token, then you can make the slashing of the bond a governance decision. So if you have a sequencer that engage in malicious MEV extraction, then you can leave it up to the governance token holders to make a vote to slash his bond and throw him out. So that's one way to mitigate malicious MEV strategies. And I think that's actually will probably be a pretty good and secure model, because there's both the financial incentive for the sequencer to stay a sequencer. I mean, you can have fees that go to the sequencer that are not, even if he doesn't extract MEV, he'll still earn money just from sequencing the transactions and earning the natural fees that you have decided that this sequencer should get. So there's an incentive for him to just keep running this node. He earns money for doing it. And if he would go to the dark side and do anything malicious for whatever reason, then anyone can at any time, just by nature of how the optimistic rollups work, they can withdraw to the main chain and exit the system whenever they want. And if he was able to, within a time period, do malicious things before that, so if people wanted to use Uniswap, for example, to swap out of something and then withdraw to the mainnet, then you could make sure that he has a bond that you can slash. So I don't think that there's a big risk that the sequencer will turn malicious if you have a bond that you can slash, and you also have a system where anyone can exit the system permissionlessly at any time if they're not happy with the services that are provided with from the sequencer.
The problem with that I could see though is if you have a governance token that can encourage people to act, in the best interest of the success of the protocol or whatever, then that can be abused by governments or elites. Like we saw that recently happen with.
Yeah, but you can always just leave the chain. You can always just leave the rollup. Like if you are not happy with the services and the level of service that is being provided by the sequencer, you can always just say, I'm done. I want to exit to the mainnet, and this is the proof that my assets exist in the rollup. I want to exit. And then the main chain will execute that withdrawal transaction for you. The sequencer doesn't have any ability to block that withdrawal transaction back to the mainnet from you. So there's a very little incentive for the rollup operator to become malicious in this way when he knows that anyone can just leave him at any time and go to another rollup.
So they can pick and choose the nodes or whatever that they want to be, like have processing their transactions. Like how does that work? As like from a user perspective, what does that mean to like leave a sequencer and go to another one?
No, well, it could. Well, for instance, if you are an Arbitrum and the Arbitrum sequencer is malicious, then you say, well, screw this. I'm going to use Optimism instead. That's you just make a withdrawal transaction on Arbitrum.
So go to a different side chain that's using the.
I use a different rollup, different rollup. But you could also just spin up a different Arbitrum smart contract. Although that would be require probably a bit more work to redeploy all the smart contracts on the rollup once again to create the ecosystem that you had, but there's no lock-in effect. Like there might be a lock-in effect in terms of ecosystem. If you have a very vibrant rollup ecosystem, then you might have some like friction, inertia to leave that system and go to another one, which may cause you to put up with a little bit of poor behavior from the sequencer, but not a lot. I think that at any point where the rollup operator becomes too, doesn't do his job sufficiently well enough, then people are going to leave that system. I have, however, proposed to the Arbitrum team, what they should do is that they should allow the sequencer to engage in useful MEV extraction. I mean, there is MEV extraction that hurts the user, which is when you do sandwiching attacks and things like that. But there is some level of MEV extraction that's just beneficial in the sense that you can, if you have a decentralized exchange that isn't balanced, it needs ARB in order for prices to be harmonized, then anyone can make an arbitrage transaction that extracts some MEV, but it also stabilizes prices. So if you allow the rollup operator to extract this MEV, which only from the user's perspective, the only thing it does is that it harmonizes price levels between different currency pairs. You could also allow the sequencer to have the first right to liquidate, for example, vaults, like an AVI, like a CDP in Maker or something like that, where you can liquidate vaults that are under collateralized. That's also something that's beneficial to the system, something that somebody needs to do, but it also gives, the person who does it also earns money. So if you allow the sequencer to extract this positive MEV that's actually a net positive for the system, then if that sequencer earns some money from doing this, he could actually subsidize the cost to post transaction data to the layer 1. So right now on an optimistic rollup, you still have to pay like 30 cents, 50 cents, or maybe $1 to make a transaction. And sometimes it's $5, depending on what type of transaction that you want to make. But if you allow him to get like the first actor to capture arbitrage opportunities and liquidations, then maybe he will be fine like paying for that on-chain data storage cost using his ether, but he still gets to be the god and extract the positive MEV from the rollup that he controls. I think that a lot of users would be happy in that system because liquidations would happen as soon as they become available. Everything would be arbitraged so that the price pairs would be the same in the rollup as they are on the main chain. And they wouldn't have to pay anything to use the rollup. Transaction fees could be free inside the rollup. That's a really attractive model, I think, that I do think we'll see some type of experimentation with from different rollup operators.
Eric, have you given any thought to kind of using rollups for depth sharding? So one of the interesting ideas that were proposed to me by the Starkware team was that you could have multiple different rollups, in their case, ZK rollups, effectively running instances of, let's call it a DEX, right? And so, but they would be like, servers in a massively multiplayer online game, right? Each server has its own collection of users, but then they would all get aggregated together. And then you could basically spin up, in the way that you do load balancing, you spin up servers. You could do load balancing by spinning up rollups. Have you given any thought to that model?
Do you mean like you have, for example, StarkX that aggregates transactions from DYDX and generates, like that you have for every single application, you have a proof system that is segregated on application level, like application-specific rollups. Is that what you're describing?
I don't know if it necessarily needs to be application-specific, although I imagine it probably would be, yes.
Well, there's one concept that I know that the Starkware team is experimenting with. It might be the one that you're describing, which is called, for example, a distributed automated market maker. They call it a DAM, like DAMM, distributed automated market maker, which would allow you to have liquidity pools to use the same layer 2 proof system. So you could aggregate transactions from many different AMMs, and then you could have them match at a central point. I think I'm a bit bad at explaining this concept, but I know that the Starkware team is exploring at aggregating proofs from many different applications to aggregate the proofs into one single proof that they post on the mainnet. And that could also actually make liquidity, allow liquidity to flow from one AMM to another, because they would be interpretable at the same aggregation point. So you could have liquidity spread between many different DEXs because they use the same proof system at the end. I think that's the general concept for a distributed AMM. And I think that's going to happen for sure. That's going to happen. It's going to happen on Ethereum and probably any other smart contract platform that uses rollup technology. It's just a natural extension of the rollup concept for ZK rollups.
But it wouldn't work across, so you wouldn't be able to do it with PancakeSwap and Sushi, for example.
You can aggregate the liquidity so that if you have two orders that are coming in at the same time, instead of them matching at bad prices for either one, then if you in the when you're trying to settle those transactions, you allow them to cross-reference each other at the point of settlement to harmonize prices for both. That's the so no, I do think that you can use this to source liquidity from multiple different venues so that they can interact with each other. I think that's the general concept. But I'm also a bit bad at explaining this. I realize that I'm listening to myself, not explaining it very well. It's probably because I don't know the concept very well myself.
Well, this has been fascinating. Eric, I have to run, but I wonder if you'd be open to having a call about this and maybe some other issues about things that you find interesting and valuable in the space right now.
Yeah, sure. I can be one of those other maxis on the list, although I'm not on maxi anymore.
You're a recovering maxi.
Yeah, I also need to jump off, by the way, but so I don't know, maybe it's time to wrap up the space if there's nobody else going to be answering questions on stage. But
that makes the three of us and four of us with Udi and Brad, and thank you very much, all of you guys for joining.
I'm still a Bitcoin maximalist. Hold on here, fellas.
Brad, you're still here. You can stay and answer questions, but I also got to bounce, to be honest. But we would love to have this discussion with you as well. Yago, I'm sure would be happy. We have plenty of matters to discuss, and this sovereignty will be gathering maybe every week, maybe every 2 weeks. But we thank you, really, everyone, for joining. It was a great evening talking about Bitcoin maximalism, toxicity, about whether or not it matters that it's decentralized, whether you should just risk adjust it and make your decisions based on that. All in all, we had 2.5 hours, which were amazing, and I really thank all of you who participated, joined, listened, and I want to remind you to follow us, on all of our social channels. If you haven't, so follow us on Twitter first, obviously, and then go to our YouTube channel, subscribe. We also have our community groups on Telegram, Discord, where you can come ask questions. We have lots of community members and community managers who are always there to help with every question. You need to make your first steps with the sovereign world, and we'd like to make everything to make this journey as easy as possible for you. So thank you very much for joining, guys. We're going to wrap it up. Yago, unless you have something to say, this meeting is adjourned.
Thanks, everyone. Hope to see you soon, and stay sovereign.
Oh, thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.